Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and also the founder of Vertex Partnership Academies and International Baccalaureate Charter High School in the Bronx in New York.
Hello, I'm Nique, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI and an adjunct professor at Rice Business School and the WashU Olin Business School.
All right, Nique, great to see you as always, and great to engage our listeners once again in uplifting the work of some incredible Black men whose work just deserves to have a bigger platform. And today we are excited to have the inimitable Devon Westhill. Devon, great to see you.
Great to see you, Ian, and you too, Nique. It's wonderful to be a part of this program that I think is doing really, really fantastic stuff, as you mentioned, to tee up for folks out there and the rest of the country, stories about people who are doing great things, particularly Black men. And so I'm overjoyed to be here with you.
All right. Well, you are you have accomplished yourself some pretty exceptional things. You are today the president of the Center for Equal Opportunity, which is an amazing organization, which we can't wait to talk about. But it's also relevant that you were part of the first Trump administration. You ran the Civil Rights Office for the USDA as deputy secretary. And you just shared the good news, and congratulations. You have been nominated to join the current Trump administration. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And good luck through the nomination process.
Yeah, thank you. It'll be my first time actually going through the full confirmation process. Hopefully I'm confirmable and confirmed. It's an honor to serve my country again. And I'm very pleased that the president would select me to go back and run that office at USDA once again.
All right. Well, we are excited and feel better when talent of your caliber is part of the leadership. So, but let's get started and talk about Devon Westhill before you were the Devon Westhill of today and all of your accomplishments. But when you were growing up, when did you realize that race was a thing? That this was somehow relevant to other people or to you, that your skin color meant something?
Yeah. Great opening question, and a really deep one that I've thought about for a long time. And I think about professionally now, of course, as a civil rights lawyer. But to go back to your first comment, what was it like before you're the Devon Westhill of today? And on the inside, I just feel like Devon Westhill, like I've always been. I'm just a poor, sort of Black kid raised in the South by a single mother, simple guy. I've heard Justice Thomas describe himself in this way. I describe myself this way in part because I admire him, and I like to think that I'm somewhat like him in some ways, if I can at all. But I come from normal stock. Right. There's no one, in fact, my mother raised us, without a father. My father has been in prison all my life. To this day, he's in prison. I didn't really know my extended family. And my mother raised us with a high school diploma. That was the highest level of learning that anyone sort of within our circles growing up had. And these were all Black communities. And you mentioned sort of, when did race become this thing that I recognized or was presented to me as a thing? I'd say really right away. My mother's white. She was the only in these impoverished, all Black communities. She's the only white person that was in these communities that I can remember. That it was all Black, and so while my siblings and I, my sister, my brother, and I grew up in a household with, a white mother, everybody else in the community was Black, and we were raised in sort of that culture. And that culture is not what I hear a lot of people talk about, sort of the Black culture. It was a poor Southern Black culture, which I think varies. The Black culture varies. It's not monolithic around the country. And I try to explain some of that in my writing and speaking about race relations and social progress and so forth. But that's when right away I realized I'm the lightest one of my family, besides my mother, lightest one of my siblings. But it was very clear. I looked different. My siblings were slightly lighter than some other people. And so there was sort of a colorism element to how we saw ourselves and how other Black people in the community saw us and saw themselves. And then also saw my mother as well. So race was very sort of in our face from the very beginning. And we realized that there was some value tied to certain races and less to others, and this community and outside of it, and to the color of your skin as well, how dark it was, how light it was. And it's somewhat, it surprises people sometimes when I tell them, this is the way I grew up and so on. I experienced more colorism probably growing up than I did what I would consider racism or discrimination because of my race. But in any event, very, very early on, it was obvious that race was a thing.
And did you feel it from, like, was there from the Black community in particular any kind of hostility or resentment to you because you were of mixed race?
Yes. I don't know that it was true hostility because in many ways we felt like full members of the community. We were just other people in the community who were other Black people in the community, which is why oftentimes when I describe myself, I don't say I'm a biracial man or I grew up Black. I'm Black, and everyone in those communities viewed me and my siblings as members of the Black community there. So I shouldn't say it was all sort of hostility and so forth, but there was certain elements of almost sort of this is a difficult thing to talk about when it comes to relations within certain Black communities. That people who are lighter skinned might be better than people who are darker skinned. And there's sometimes an undercurrent of jealousy over that type of dynamic. And to make it even worse, when you endeavor to speak English well, you care about education, you care about getting good grades in school, you're not interested in some of the things that others in the community have held up as being valued activities, like activities associated with street life. You're viewed as an other, and it's very easy to do right off the bat when it comes to sort of differences in color, and then it is compounded when you're different in this way and other more significant ways. And because I don't consider the color to be that big of an issue personally, as I've experienced, it really is those significant ways. Well, you must be better. You think you're better than everyone else because you speak like a white person. You think you're better than everyone else because you have these sort of white values, like valuing education and so forth, that created hostility, created tension within the community, among the Black people in the community.
Yeah. Do you think that dynamic still exists along racial lines, that someone who's Black that values education or studies hard or that somehow you're not authentically Black and that you're chasing a certain level of whiteness? Do you think that that still exists?
I really don't know. I don't spend a lot of my time in the communities like the ones that I grew up in. In fact, the community, the community that I grew up in, principally, like once my mother rose to the level where she could buy our first house, which was when I was going to middle school. But even those communities beforehand, where we lived in Section 8 apartment housing, and before that, when we lived in housing projects, and we were homeless for periods of time before that. But all of those communities are actually gone now. So it's those specific communities I don't spend any time in really at all. And the one where my wife or my mother bought her first home has been gentrified. So like it is not an all Black community anymore, for good or for ill, or everything in between. So I don't really know. I live a different sort of life now. We live a more comfortable. We're not. My wife and I make a decent income. We live in a very diverse, racially and ethnically diverse neighborhood. So I don't know exactly whether that is still the case in those neighborhoods. But what I do know is that there are some elite Black individuals and groups in this country who seem to believe that it's perfectly okay to sort of promote or not to speak out against the ideas that speaking proper English or valuing education is a perfectly fine thing for the Black communities in America to hold up. One of the things that I've spoken out against is, the idea that math, for example, needs to be taught a different way to people because they happen to be Black or, darker skin color and whatnot. This is some of the stuff that we see in what I call the DEI enterprise, which I think is totally wrongheaded. And unfortunately, to the extent that thinking still exists in those poor Black Southern communities that I experienced, it may well be the case because this elite thinking is trickling down or is being pushed into those communities. But I don't know for sure.
Devon, we had a guest on a couple of months ago whose mom happened to be white, father was African American, and I asked him, and I didn't have any data to support it, but I have this gut feel that in mixed race relationships or marriages where the mother is white, that the children are given a broader perspective on what's possible. That it said it in simple words that almost the anything is possible mentality that is just, I think, a part of most white people's nature in America is transferred to the children from the mother. And that maybe that is not as common if the mother happens to be Black. I don't have data to support this. It's just a gut feel. And I threw it out to our prior guests. I just throw it out to you as a thought driver.
Yeah, good question. I don't know either. What I can say is my white mother set an incredible example for her 3 Black kids. That matters. I grew up in communities. Actually, I only began to think about this after I became an adult. It didn't hit me until I was an adult. That I thought back. I thought, boy, there were no fathers anywhere in the communities in which I grew up. None. There was not one in my household, of course. None of my neighbors had fathers. There are no men whatsoever. I remember one family that had a father, and their house was nice fence around it. They were good, well-behaved kids and everything else. When a lot of other kids like us in the community, we were running the streets and doing various things and so forth. but there are no men in the community. And so a lot of those kids that I grew up with, again, all poor Black kids, were being raised by their sisters, their cousins, their grandmothers, to the extent they had anybody, really. And a lot of those families were very big as well. They had lots of kids in those houses that were being raised by a 16 or 17-year-old sister. What I had was a mother who loved us, a mother who only had a high school diploma, but realized that education was important, made us go to school every day, couldn't be there all the time. So we were goofing off and doing things that we ought not to have been doing with our free time and extra time and so forth. But mom went to work every day, and then she went to her second job every day, and then sometimes she went to her third job every day. So while I can't speak specifically, I don't know, Nique, whether or not your theory is right or wrong. What I can say about my experience was that we had a great leader in our house, and unfortunately, a lot of the other kids in the community didn't even have one good leader in their household, whether that person be white, Black, whatever. They just didn't have that type of person leading the way and showing them that hard work pays off. And again, as I mentioned before, we went from homeless to hot housing projects to Section 8 to having our own house, having my mother having her own car, things like that. We saw the process through her hard work, through her example.
And Devon, just one more on that. You mentioned Section 8, and I think if you go on X today, I think there's energy around, we got to get rid of all these entitlement programs. It's bootstraps or nothing. I'd love to hear your perspective on, do programs like Section 8 and related, do they have a role? Do they add value? I mean, obviously we know your story, but would love to just hear your perspective on it, having been a part of benefiting from one of those programs.
Yeah. Look, I try not to spend too much time on X, but to the extent that there's any sort of pushback against the idea that we ought to just all be pulling ourselves up by the bootstrap and we'll never need any sort of assistance in our lives, I think that's good pushback, particularly because kids cannot do that. Children need protection, and we ought to have a safety net that is well designed, is not susceptible easily to waste, fraud, and abuse, but that exists particularly for children, but also for adults who are down on their luck on for various reasons or other. But I am center right person, a classical liberal. I believe that it ought to be sort of the last line of resort. Communities ought to be the better place to sort of to help people who are down on their luck. They're better able to identify what the problems are, who the people are who really need the help and don't need the help, and much less of a big government coming in and solving the the saving the day type person.
Yeah. When I was at the White House, we used to have this motto. Whenever it came to social welfare policy, it was the 3 T's: timely, targeted, and temporary. Timely, targeted, and temporary. And if you use that as an ethos for social welfare policy, it reduces the chances that it can become a way of life in terms of the dependency. Devon, I've discovered some things about you that I never knew in this conversation. So just thank you for sharing it. And I just have to ask about your own father. Do you think there'll ever be a time when you will get to see him and maybe reconcile? And what do you think he would think of everything that you have accomplished?
Well, I'll say I don't think about that very much, Ian. My life is very good. I don't know that it is worth trying to have a relationship with sort of a stranger who's never been there. And do I think it will ever happen? No, I don't. I don't plan on going to the Department of Corrections and signing the visitor log and doing all those sorts of things. That's the only way to go see. You can't come see me. But I will say, and that's perfectly fine. I'll say I don't hate the man. I really don't. I have no animosity towards him or anything. I think about the fact that his particular situation was that he became addicted to substances, and that just derailed his life, like it did a lot of people's. And it substances continue to do that to people's lives, unfortunately. And I really don't see it as fully his fault. He's someone who got into something bad, and unfortunately, that was the least of the problems. Now he has to live with knowing that he has children out there who are doing things, and he can't be a part of their lives, and all these types of things. And I think, boy, that would be the real jail sentence for me. I have 2 children now, and I can't imagine not having them in my life every single day. I miss when I'm on the road and I miss a day or 2 without them. It is excruciating for me. But it also makes me think, and I've been lambasted in some debates and so forth for saying this type of thing. I realize now how much I missed out on by not having a father. And I don't mean that to say, I sit down and have these grand philosophical conversations with my children, and at the end of the day, they learn this life lesson because of one of my lectures.
Right.
I'm there essentially every night. Just kiss them goodnight. I'm there every morning to say, okay, see you later, as they ride their bikes off to school. I happen to be there every day and doing little things that you'd never think about that I never once ever experienced. In the aggregate, I think that has an enormous effect on your self-esteem,
absolutely,
on your sense of worth, and all sorts of other things that are, it would take another entire hour podcast to explain what I see now that my children have just by having me and just by having their mother together, married in the house, that I did not get one single time as a kid. In any event, I don't think. Sorry, I don't think that
no.
I don't think there's nothing to reconcile, and it's probably never going to happen that I ever meet the man, really. But that's okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure he would be very proud of you, as complicated a situation as it is. Well, then let's fast forward, because now you run an organization with the critical words "equal opportunity" in the title, and I'm curious what you think that means in today's world, where there's often a battle between this concept of equity and equal opportunity. And I've heard you speak a lot, but tell us a little bit about equal opportunity as your organization pursues it, and how that conflicts with what seems to be this pursuit of equity in our current narrative.
Yeah, our thinking at the Center for Equal Opportunity, appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about it, which is CEO, as we call it, has been around for 30 years. It celebrates 30 years this year. And it was founded because the founder thought back in 1995 that the country was trending in the wrong direction in terms of thinking about how we treat each other on the basis of race or other characteristics. Linda Chavez, who founded the organization, thought that we were really putting too much emphasis on judging people by their skin color or by where their ancestors came from. And what we really needed to be doing was the opposite of that. We should be treating people based on their character and their talent and what experiences they've had, and what they bring to the table in terms of diverse perspective, instead of those sorts of traits. And so started this organization to do a number of different things. But one of the things that it does very well, I think, and one of the things that I enjoy the most, is to talk to the public about these concepts. Now, equal opportunity, the reason why that's in the name is that's what that's the tip of the spear for us. It really is the idea that comes from most recently and sort of exalted at the highest, most recently, the 1950s and 1960s civil rights movement that is exemplified by Dr. King's statement that we should be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. There ought not to be arbitrary barriers erected because of immutable characteristics such as our skin color or our ancestry. And aside from that, it's okay to debate what exactly merit looks like, what exactly diversity of experience or perspective looks like, and what is better or worse when it comes to that. And that's a lot of what we talk about. But what we will never do, and what we push back very muscularly against, is the idea that outcomes must be equitable. And that's, I think, what the contemporary view of the word equity has evolved into. It sounds very close to equality, but it couldn't be any more different than equality. It's about engineering certain outcomes, and what that does actually is trample on traditional fundamental American and Western values, such as equality for everyone, equal protection, and fair play. And that's the type of thing that, we just push back very vigorously against.
Yeah, I mean, what does it even mean that outcomes are equitable? What does that actually mean? Because usually in practice, the people that are saying it, when they see unequal outcomes at the identity group level, whether that's by race or by gender or by class, that's when the alarm bells go on for them. That's inequitable. That's inequity. But in what society, in what business, in what competition are the outcomes equal?
Yeah, I say essentially never. Right? There have been whole books, many books written about this, mostly by Thomas Sowell, of course. And so I don't know if he'll ever be able to sit for your podcast, but it'd be amazing, of course.
Well, there's a movement to get him to win the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
I did see that recently, and obviously I support it. So here, endorsed by the inimitable Devon Westhill.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I think, to put a finer point on this, what is an equitable outcome really runs into some serious questions when you look at what folks who push this type of thing try to do or refrain from doing. Right? Oftentimes, I'm the one who is more than happy in a presentation when we get to this type of question to say, well, should we have equitable outcomes in terms of the races of students that we have in college and universities? If that's the case, we really need to do work in HBCUs, particularly those that are more than 90% Black or
Right.
Hispanic serving institutions, very heavily Hispanic. Are we really serious about that? I think actually what we're talking about is simply having a preference for certain races of people or certain ethnic groups over others. That's all. So if it happens to be the case that there's more than 13%, which I think is what the Black population is estimated at in America, more than 13% of Black people on corporate boards, the folks who yell, we need equity, we need representation and equal outcomes and so forth, are actually not going to gripe very much at all about that, because what they really want at core is to have more of their favored race or ethnicity represented in certain spaces, really not all spaces, but certain elite spaces. That's really what we're arguing about if we're being very honest about things. And I think that is an ugly thing to support, just pushing certain races over others for the very obvious historical issues that we've gone through, but because I believe in fundamental American Western values of equality for everyone.
Yeah. Wow. So as you think about what's happening in the larger society right now, clearly there is pushback against this concept of equity, and in particular, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that a good thing that's happening? Is the pendulum swinging too far now to the other side, where any mention of diversity is viewed as a negative?
Well, here we go. You know, I think I really appreciate using the pendulum sort of metaphor because I use it a lot myself. I think the pendulum did swing very, very far left over the last number of years, 4 or 5 years, certainly after the George Floyd murder, towards we've got to do something to deal with what are real problems. Some of them, at least. There are socioeconomic disparities that exist that fall along racial lines, and we should be thinking about why that is. I disagree with the vast majority of the fixes for how we can work on those disparities. In fact, we actually need to understand what the disparities are and why they exist before we start trying to put patches on these things. And I think that's what a lot of the DEI enterprise, as I call it, has done. But yes, look, this pendulum, I think, at all times throughout history has to begin to swing back the other way. Now, it is swinging back very aggressively right now. I support a strong swing back. However, there's definitely there's definitely a place where it's going to swing much too far. There ought to be people who are thoughtful, who are serious about civil rights, about equality of opportunity for everyone, about creating a situation where impediments are removed from people's ability to access opportunity. And those individuals are the ones who need to have a voice. Those are people who need to be in a space where they can reach power centers and speak up and talk about the core civil rights protections and so forth that we have in this country, so that they're not trampled as the pendulum swings back very aggressively the other way. But I largely support moving very rapidly and aggressively away from what we've been doing in the DEI enterprise, in the corporate space, in higher education, and in many other areas of American life, including in our military service, as quickly as possible. There will be some broken things in this process, but hopefully, the institutions hold, as they say, and we get to a better place than where we've been. There have been a lot of people who've been harmed, and our American experiment has been harmed as a result of the DEI enterprise in the last number of years.
Yeah. Devon, I wanted to, I know that you're a lawyer, studied law. I want to talk about AI in law. A lot of young people are like, well, what careers should I pursue in the future? Well, is there a need for lawyers, 10 years from now with AI? Have you thought about, the role of AI in law and whether how the function of law may evolve with the advent and integration of intelligent artificial systems?
Well, this is a fascinating question, one that I haven't thought very much about. And I wasn't expecting to get on this podcast, but let me say, I don't think deeply about it. But I do think we're dealing with sort of a very interesting time that we haven't really experienced in the past in the same way. What I mean by that is, there's always been an uproar when there's change in the labor market. There's innovation that causes change in the labor market. We end up with less tellers, but we've got the automated teller machine, and we end up there are no more buggy drivers or whatever it is, but we've got the new things that help us get around and so forth. That those were sort of mechanical innovations that disrupted middle class or working class type professions. Now we're dealing with artificial intelligence, as you suggested, that I think actually is going to disrupt for the first time, maybe in history, white collar type professions and the arts and these types of things that have been traditionally safe from typical innovations that disrupt the labor market. And I'm curious about how we react to that. Before it's been, sort of protests and no, we want to keep, our jobs. And so, well, now we're in a place where it's all the eggheads who maybe are affected by a disruption in the labor market. And the eggheads are a minority when it comes to the labor market, but maybe a loud minority. I don't know. So I don't have an answer to exactly how AI might disrupt the legal profession and other white collar sort of professions, but I do think it's going to, and I'm curious about what that looks like going forward. I maybe I'll be out of a job. I don't know, but I know that I can always fall back on coding. That's what they tell me.
There you go.
Ian, should we move to the speed round?
We should. I did want to ask just one quick question about we're taping this on the eve of Super Bowl weekend,
yeah,
and the National Football League has just announced for the first time since 2021 they will not have the words "end racism" on the field. They are removing that language after 4 years of virtue signaling. I'm curious I'm curious what you think about that and just what it means from the larger culture and this kind of pivot that is happening in the nation. Mind you, they are still going to have the performance of "Lift Every Voice and Sing," which is often considered the Black national anthem, but it'll be off camera. It'll be before so it won't be nationally televised. But I'm just curious what you think about that, because in 2021. Roger Goodell said, we as a league, we're standing up for Black people and we're going to start promoting end racism. And now they're going to use the words "choose love."
Okay. Well, this is the first I'm hearing of this. So these are just totally off the top of my head kind of reactions. My first reaction is the same as it always is when I hear these types of things, right? There's a period of time where we had to take down statues everywhere. And we had to change the name of streets and things and other type things to really show that we cared, right, about the struggle or whatever the struggle is. And I see it mostly the way you described it, Ian, as being virtue signaling to show that we're sort of in this thing that we must be in this struggle in a certain way and on the right side of history and so forth. When at the end of the day, like most virtue signaling, it does nothing of real significance, nothing of value. I think it's great if we want to be serious about diminishing racism or that type of behavior or thinking in this country. I don't think we can just end it. I think that's a fool's errand. That's not the type of thing that we can be serious or reasonable people about. But if we want to be, it has to be more than sort of putting it on the back of your football helmet or something. And I hate to sort of describe it like this, but I find it kind of silly and unserious, these types of things. And I think probably just getting rid of it is good. It's distracting. It's the type of thing that people don't want to see when they see a sporting event or something. They really want to get away from those types of concepts for just a little while, maybe. And I think that's okay. We don't have to always be, have it in front of us. And I think that can actually create hostility to real conversations about these important concepts when it's just ubiquitous. It's always in someone's
Yep.
face.
Yep.
Very good. So, Devon, we have a segment of the show called the Speed Round. I'm going to offer up a couple of names or a couple of institutions, ask you to pick one and tell us why. So we normally start with Malcolm or Martin.
Oh, Malcolm.
And
Malcolm.
tell the viewers why.
So obviously, big fan of Martin and Malcolm, but I think Malcolm is sort of misunderstood. He was a big believer in the uplift of communities and not exterior help, so to speak. That communities really needed to change on their own. That you ought to be clean. You ought to value education. You ought to be married and be monogamous and take care of your families. These types of conservative values that are very, very important, that actually were very common in Black communities and certain eras of American history, that I think if we brought back, not to say that Martin didn't have some of these same characteristics, but if we brought them back, we might see much more success in underprivileged communities. I like Malcolm a lot.
Next is going to be a hard one. It's college football season, and it's UNC or the University of Florida.
Oh, football.
Well, I'm. You went to both those schools, so I'm obviously they have some rivalry with football. But in general, UNC versus University of Florida. How do you think about them?
I grew up in Florida. I am a Florida man. I live in Florida now. It is home. It has been home almost all of my life. I am a Florida Gator through and through, especially football. Now during basketball season, I can root for Carolina, but Florida's doing actually really exceptionally well in basketball this season. So, but I'm really a Gator.
Okay, well that was easier than I thought it would be. Elon Musk or Steve Jobs?
Oh, interesting. Big fan of Elon Musk, only because there's sort of a recency, of course, right? He's here, he's right now, and I've never studied Steve Jobs very closely. I'm sort of loosely familiar with what he's done. I know that he's done really amazing things technologically, but I really like the big ideas of Elon Musk. Nothing's too big for Elon Musk, and when he gets his sights set on something, he goes at it 100%. And I'm liking what he's doing with his Doge group right now. So Elon Musk.
Very good. And lastly, Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan?
Rogan. I respect lots of what both of them have done for journalism, which needs to be made great again, and maybe it will in the coming years. But I like the style of Rogan. It's laid back. It's easy to listen to, and really I haven't kept up very much with either one of them, but Rogan would be, I think, my choice today.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Devon, we're almost coming to the end, but I do want to get your thoughts on, I think the first time I actually interacted with you was listening to your thoughts on what was going to happen in the Supreme Court a few years ago related to college admissions and race-based preferences. And I think this was a time before the decision had been made. So there were a lot of people who were predicting the world's going to come to an end. All these racist schools are suddenly not going to accept any, students of color at all. And so I'm wondering, now the decision's been made, it's, almost 2 years. What has been the implication? Do you think universities are generally living by these new rules? Are they trying to shirk the system? Or are the principles of race-blind admissions or race-blind preferences, are those now starting to spread even to other institutions to create more of a foundation for equal opportunity?
I think, yeah, it has to actually be somewhere for it to spread. I think my prediction is before the decision came down that if the Supreme Court outlawed race affirmative action in college admissions, that the most elite schools, and we should be clear, we're really talking about the top maybe 100 schools in the country. There are many, many more who don't do this type of thing at all. But that they would attempt to evade the decision in some way or other if they could. And I think we should take them at their word that, when the decision came down, that they would still desire and attempt to racially diversify their campuses, ethnically diversify their campuses as best they could. That what we've seen also in terms of the numbers, the data that has come out afterwards suggests that at the time, Harvard and the University of North Carolina, who are the two schools that were sued in that litigation, that and there was a whole lot of schools, actually elite schools as well, who used race affirmative action or used race affirmative action, who wrote briefs in the case that said, look, if we don't have it, we're not going to be able to keep our campuses racially diverse and ethnically diverse and so forth. But the data that's come out since suggests that they were either mistaken in thinking that, some of them, or if they were right, they have found some way recently to do that. The numbers that have come out in terms of the demographics of the entering classes that have been affected by the Supreme Court's decision at some schools like Yale and Duke and Northwestern have not, the demographics have not changed hardly at all. In fact, in some places, the unusual thing has happened, that there is an increase in Black admittance and a decrease in Asian American admittance. Now, I will say it's early. This is preliminary sort of data. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that there are new sort of shifting that's happening and sifting and filtering that's happening that we won't understand until we have a number of years of data to look at. But it says something about what the schools are doing or attempting to do. I think that that what they said beforehand is not syncing up with what we're seeing now, and I do think that they are still attempting to racially diversify their campuses. I don't know exactly how, but it's the type of thing that's going to come out with time.
Yeah, and my hope is that this is an opportunity to shed light on where the real issue is, right? Because, just within the last 2 weeks, the National Assessment for Educational Progress released their results in terms of reading and math performance on 4th grade and 8th grade of students all across the country. And it's pretty low across the board. Something like only 38% of all kids in our country are reading at proficiency levels. But in the Black community, at 4th grade, there's a chart that's been released of every state, what the proficiency levels are for Black 4th graders. And the number one state in the country is Texas. And I'm curious, Devon, what you might guess is what is the proficiency rate of Black 4th graders in the state of Texas, the highest state in the country? What would be your wild guess?
I can't guess, Ian. You're going to make me look like a fool.
No. I mean, no, you, like most other people, would say, well, okay, all right, 50%. The number is 27%.
Wow.
And that's the highest in the country.
You were going to make me look a fool then.
No. It's not. We're not the fools. It's that we're tolerating an educational system that is producing too many kids that cannot read. And by the way, the lowest state is 4% or 5%. Wow. And so so when we're talking about race-based affirmative action or preferences, I mean, that's almost like an elite problem.
Yes.
That's we've got to deal with things far earlier, and that's why the Center for Equal Opportunity, organizations that are focused on this concept of equal opportunity. How about we create more opportunities for kids to have school choice and the ability to select schools that would allow them to really flourish over time.
We're on the same page, Ian. There's no doubt about that. I oftentimes say it again to gasps and boos that we are looking at the wrong place in the pipeline to all of a sudden become concerned that people are falling behind. There's a reason why race-based affirmative action existed for as long as it did. People were showing up, black and brown kids were showing up at the schoolhouse door under competitive
Right.
than their white and other peers. Why? Right? We have to look at the pipeline. There are reasons, and I think it's much easier, of course, to slap the Band-Aid on it, right, at the last stage. And I think that's, been sufficient for a lot of people for a long period of time. But that is the type of thing that comes with so many additional problems, in addition to not actually solving the real root problems, that you have to have people like you, Ian, like you, Nique, like myself, out saying we have to actually do the hard work now that we have the opportunity to do it. The Supreme Court has spoken on this issue. We don't have, explicit race preferential treatment discrimination at the last moment now before admittance to an elite university. We have to go and do the hard work in the communities, do the hard work for education to make sure that those students are competitive when it comes time for competing for college seats.
Yep. Wow. Well, Devon, outstanding. 100% agree. So let's end on your opportunity to share your wisdom with a young man, Daryl, an imaginary young man who's 16 years old, black kid, living in forgotten USA, this kind of imaginary urban city, where Daryl hears lots of narratives about how the system is rigged against him, and he's a black kid. You're a black man in America. What else can you expect? So I'm curious what your advice would be to the Daryls of the world who are trying to find their way.
Yeah. So, I was Daryl earlier in my life. I wasn't raised in an urban setting necessarily, but one close enough to the center of a college town that sometimes it felt that way. But it's the same thing I would tell anyone, including myself at that time, what I tell my children today as well, despite the fact that, they're not, they're not, poor, black kids growing up in the inner city, or, they're doing well. They're what we might consider privileged, and they're extraordinarily racially and ethically diverse, black, white, and Vietnamese. But it goes for everyone. But it's hard to do, I think, sometimes, especially when you have the type of narratives flying around that you just described, Ian. But that is, be yourself. This takes me back to the beginning of our conversation. When I said, the fact that I thought education was important, that I wanted to speak proper English, that I didn't want to do the type of things that everyone expected out of especially the boys, to be doing in the communities that I grew up in, as it pertains to sort of street behavior. It made me somewhat of an outcast. There was some hostility towards me. But at the end of the day, what I had to do was be true to myself, the things that I liked and wanted. And as I continued to chase those types of things, it's led me to where I am today, and all those different stepping stones throughout my life, because I was really just being true to myself. Be courageous in being yourself. It will lead to fantastic things, no matter what your race is, no matter where you are. The world is bigger than just your street, your block, your hood. And and it really is your oyster. Just be yourself.
Outstanding. Great advice. Devon Westhill, thank you for all of your work that you have done and this potential very exciting path that you're on now with the new administration and just everything that you've accomplished. So well done. Well done, my
I'm
friend.
so excited, so happy to have been able to do this with the two of you. You're doing fantastic work. Thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll need security clearance the next time we talk to next time we talk to Devon.
You'll get it.
So all right, all right. Well, for our listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of The Invisible Men. You can find other episodes on www.invisible.men. We're also on every podcast platform, Spotify, and the others. Nique, as always, great to see you, and to the
Yes.
great Devon Westhill.
Great to see you, Ian and Devon. You know, it needs to be said, firstly, thank you for your service in the first administration. We are so grateful to have people like you representing us. And, you know, we're beyond excited about the potential for another opportunity for you to serve and lead. So thank you.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.